you. It's a pleasure to be here today. And I thank Kyle for the invitation to speak on the Proverbs 31 woman. It's honestly a text that's been intimidating to me all my life. How can anybody be this woman? In the heat of my mothering days, my husband and I were navigating 2 careers and 3 children, complete with the appointments and student activities and all the things, and trying to get dinner, often brought in, and then, bath, bed, rinse, repeat. None of that felt like Proverbs 31 alignment. And so, with the invitation to study this a little bit, this has pushed me to dig in Proverbs 31. And what I learned is all the conclusions I had reached about Proverbs 31 were wrong. And so I was sort of relieved about that. But I'm glad to be able to tell you what I learned about this, because I learned an awful lot in the midst of the study. And so before we get into the text, there's some backstory things that are appropriate for you to understand. First is the cultural context of the role of women at the time. Women did not have rights. There was a bride price paid for a wife, and that was determined by the heads of the families. The woman's job was to take care of the home and the children. If there were multiple wives, which was acceptable at the time, it was the woman's job to make it work and figure it out. All right. Divorce could be easily obtained. It was the husband's discretion, and it could be easily done. If there was infidelity, the blame was assigned to the wife, or assigned to the woman, whatever the case may be, and punishment typically was being publicly beaten and then stoned, all right? So while more could be said, that's typically enough for you to understand the role of women in that culture at the time, and also for you to understand how completely different Proverbs 31 is in comparison to the culture of the time. So that's the first part of what we need to understand. The next part has to do with the reality of the type of literature that Proverbs is. It's a part of wisdom literature, which means a lot of it is poetry. And if you know anything about poetry, one word can mean about 3 different things, or have layers of meaning in it, all right? And a word can cover this section and the next section, and it can cross-mean things. And that's exactly what happens here. And so to assume you can read this sequentially and understand what it's talking about, that's the first thing I learned. That is not true. You can't read it sequentially and understand its depth. That what saved me in this is word studies and understanding the word studies and the range of meaning that was in that. Because God knows how to squeeze meaning into things, and he did that. A person by the name of King Lemuel wrote this, and it was an account of his mother's conversation with him before he became king, and it was her view of what it took to become a king and what kind of wife he should select. But being God, he used that conversation to illumine what does it mean to be a wise woman. All right. Now, Ruth, the book of Ruth is referenced in here often, but its meaning crosses the Testaments. Ladies who are part of the Wednesday morning Bible study in the spring, you remember our study was Jesus and Women. And Christy McClellan wrote the book that we studied from, and what she would always tell us is that when Jesus met a woman, he met her in her area of shame and elevated her to a position of honor by the time the encounter was done. Well, come to find out, this position of honor stems back to Proverbs 31, all right? So its meaning crosses the Testaments, all right? One last thing we need to look at before we look at the text, and that is the theme of Proverbs is the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, Proverbs 1:7, and that is carried throughout the text. But it's also pretty important to understand that before reading this, all right? The fear of the Lord means being yoked with the Lord. And it is a pre-decision about how you're going to live your life. So that as you go about life, you already know that you are in allegiance to the Lord. You're yoked with the Lord. And the picture is an agricultural one because oxen were yoked together, all right? And as they were yoked together, their job was to advance cargo, and they were dependent on the driver to tell them where to go. But as they advanced, they had to navigate the territory and give in with each other and negotiate how to best advance, and they did that together. So if you were a husband and wife, you'd be yoked to the spouse, but you'd also be yoked to the Lord, depending on him for direction of where you were going to go, all right? So understanding that commitment of life, you know what? I am going to be yoked to the Lord, and I'm going to go on the path of faith as I live my life. It's a journey, and we're going to advance, and God is going to tell me, as I'm yoked to the Lord, the direction I go. And then also, the other part of this is, God knows that sometimes we don't sleep well. Part of this is understanding that when God gives you rest, the invitation is to let him give you rest and rest in what he's done for you. But not only it restores you physically, but he restores your soul. Now that phrase came from Psalm 23. You'll remember that. And who wrote that? Oh, Solomon's father, David. So there's lots of links everywhere in this text, all right? Now, we're going to talk about a wise woman is valued, a wise woman is industrious, a wise woman is socially astute, a wise woman sculpts the interior of her home, and a wise woman is a generational blessing. So let's read verses 10 to 12. A wise woman is valued. Who can find a virtuous and capable wife? She's more precious than rubies. Her husband can trust her, and she will greatly enrich his life. She brings him good, not harm, all the days of her life. First thing we need to look at, and this was a surprise to me, that it's a virtuous woman who can find. Now, when it says a virtuous wife, that's correct, but it's incomplete. The root of the word is a virtuous woman, meaning married and unmarried. So this text is a profile for women. What does it take to be a wise woman, whether one is married or not? Granted, are a lot of the pictures in here for the married woman. They are. But the qualities that are lifted from here are for a wise woman who's yoked to the Lord, whether they're married or unmarried. That's the first part of it. So a wise woman who can find. That's the question, a wise woman who can find, all right? The next thing is the value. It's interesting here that jewels are used as an example. Well, jewels are used cross-culturally as something highly valuable and gets more valuable over time and more priceless over time. You know, I'm for that, because which that means is if you are a wise woman and you are yoked with the Lord and trying to live your life, you get more valuable as you age. I'm for that. I am for that, all right? She brings honor to her husband. She brings honor to those in her family, is the extended definition of that. It is husband, but it is family as well. So she contributes toward a good reputation, all right? Next, we're going to look at a wise woman is industrious. Verses 13 and following. She finds wool and flax and busily spins it. She is like a merchant's ship bringing her food from afar. She gets up before dawn to prepare breakfast for her household and plan the day's work for her servant girls. She goes to inspect a field and buys it. With her earnings, she plants a vineyard. She is energetic and strong, a hard worker. She makes sure her dealings are profitable. Her lamp burns late into the night. Her hands are busy spinning thread, her fingers twisting fiber. Okay, that's a lot, all right? But this woman is a manager inside and outside the home, all right? There's the stuff to do, and she knows what has to be done. The descriptive words in here that are used are words for a soldier who's competent and equipped for the mission they have. And this soldier is ready to go, all right? She knows how to plan. She knows how to manage. She has to figure out the business outside the home. She brings into the economy of the home, because in this example, the woman is profitable in her business, all right? She inhabits her role. Inhabit is a loaded word in Scripture. You'll note in Joshua 1, Joshua 24, God told the people of Israel before they went to the promised land, go and inhabit the land, which means own it. Make it yours. And the message here for us is, ladies, own your role and make it yours. Don't hide. Don't shrivel. Own your spot, all right? Because you contribute an awful lot in order to get things done within the home, because there's plenty to do in the home. She wakes up early, she goes to bed late, all the things, all right, that we do. We know how to multitask. We do know how to do that. But then she had to get her things, her products ready for business, all right? At the time, the marketplace would have been like a craft fair is now, where there was stand after stand after stand. And so she would have her stand, and clearly in this example, she had yarn, she had fabric, and she was probably a seamstress, so she took orders for clothing, making clothing. So somebody had to do all of that work and get it ready to be sold. So she was at the marketplace. She knew people who were on either side of her. She knew their kids, because you'd bring the kids along and help them learn the business as well. She knew other business leaders, all right? She was a person of influence in what she did. She managed the home, she managed the business to the profit of the economy of the household. And then not only that, she went to a field to assess if it was a good field for their family or not. And when she saw it, she made a decision and shook hands and bought the field for the next vineyard, all right? She's trusted. Her management, her business skills were trusted, and she brought value economically to the home. A wise woman is industrious. And then the next one, a wise woman is socially astute. This one is very interesting to me because it is not explicit in the text. It's implicit in the text, meaning there are concept clusters, and the meaning of this part comes through as you go into the meanings of the words. Because this woman did what she did inside the home and outside the home, she was out and about, all right? So let me read verse 20. She extends a helping hand to the poor and opens her arms to the needy. Verse 26 and 27, when she speaks, her words are wise, and she gives instructions with kindness. She carefully watches everything in her household and suffers nothing from laziness, all right? This woman was out and about. She knew the community. She knew who those people were who were under-resourced, and offered a response to that. And that would have been part of her spiritual worship as being yoked to the Lord, all right? She knew the Levitical laws in chapter 4 and chapter 9 of Leviticus in responding to the needs of the poor. She also would have known about Ruth, and the practices in the book of Ruth is as you harvest a field, you'd leave the edges for the poor, all right? So she knew what it meant. She knew who the poor were because she was out and about. And she responded, though, maybe by giving them jobs, all right? But the other thing she knew is she knew about who her kids were playing with, all right? Part of this being socially astute is socially tracking the social pathway of your kids. You're watching what they're doing. You're watching who they're with. You're making rules about what they can do with other people and what can happen in your home. You're doing that because you are socially astute and you know what's going on. Christine Sheets has consented to help me today and talk about what it meant to grow up in a household where a mom watched over her. So, Christine, go ahead.
Good morning. I am the oldest of 3 daughters, and I'm honored to share today a little bit about my mom, Darla Scheit. At a very young age, my parents deliberately surrounded us with adults who loved Jesus. From early months in the nursery to Sunday school classes here at church, family friends, teachers at school, mentors, and more, my mom made sure we knew that we were cared for, we were loved, but most importantly, that we were surrounded by people who would show us Christ-likeness. In addition to God-fearing parents and spiritual initiatives in our home, Mom ensured that God and His Word were the ultimate foundation of all that we did as a family. As my sisters and I got older and began to develop our own interests and friendships, Mom reminded us of the value of character, ours and others. We were expected to be polite and kind to all, but because we had observed a multitude of Christ-centered adults as kids, that was really what modeled our dearest relationships. Friends were almost always welcome in our home, and Mom used those opportunities to get to know our closest and most frequent companions. Although the 3 of us did not always make the best choices in friends, my sisters and I each remember Mom's counsel regarding the character and integrity of the company that we kept. She would often tell us, "I will trust you until you give me a reason not to." The statement reminded us of our foundation and the reality that we were responsible for our own choices, no one else. Knowing that she had set us up for success, because of our early godly influences, she let us make our own choices. And sometimes our direction or poor choices or bad discernment of character led to concern and sometimes even trouble. Mom was not afraid to intervene. If our company's character was questionable, Mom's level of intervention ranged from simple biblical dialogue and truth to being prohibited to participate in an activity that would put us in a vulnerable position between what was right and wrong. Because Mom knew that our foundations were strong, she would ask us a series of questions that would then guide us to make the decision. The level of discernment and wisdom that Mom presented to us at a very young age taught us how to ask ourselves the same critical questions that we still ask ourselves as adults. Although we did not always understand or agree, my sisters and I firmly believed that Mom was guiding our path. She was protecting us and developing us on our spiritual journeys. And now, as wives and moms, we have really big shoes to fill when looking at this role for our own homes and our own children.
Thank you, Christine. Yeah. Okay, yes. Ladies, we can't abdicate this role, all right? Verse 26 says that a wise woman kindly offers instructions. Well, if you kindly offer instructions, it assumes that there's an instructor, and that's us, all right, with the authority to carry it out, and that's us. We need to watch what our kids are doing, all right? Now, the argument can be, you know what, I don't know, we're just going to be arguing about it. They're going to say that we're way out of it. Yeah, we got to weather that. That's just part of the deal. And will they learn some things on their own? They will, but they won't get the interpretation of a wise woman. And that matters as they face social relationships in the home. A wise woman is socially astute, all right? A wise woman sculpts the interior of her home. This is interesting to me because there's a boatload of concept clusters in this. Verse 22, she makes her own bedspreads. She dresses in fine linen and purple gowns. Well, sounds like she needs to sew the quilts and dress nice. However, there's an awful lot more to it than that. What this is talking about is the reality in our dwelling place, in our house, in our home, all right? Create a home where one's identity can grow in this home, and you look around this house or whatever your home is and say, yeah, this is us, all right? Create your home in a way, sculpt your home in a way that is responsive to family needs, all right? But it is also a picture of what we do as a family that helps craft and allows our identity to mature. All right? Part of that is what you put on the refrigerator. I understand that, but it's more than that. It's more than that. HGTV wants you to do a whole lot of things to make your home beautiful. But does your family need that? All right? And I'm a sucker for HGTV. I promise you I am. But the sculpting of the home, what you live in and surround yourself with every day matters. And let me do some Old Testament history with you. When God wanted the Ark of the Covenant built, there was details about that because God was like no other, and he has some specifications in Exodus 25 to 27. There are details about what the ark was to include because God's dwelling place, it mattered what was in there. Fast forward, 2 Chronicles 2 to 4. Solomon built the temple. And there were all kinds of detailed plans about what that dwelling was included because that's where God dwelt and that's where God's people dwelt. The people who were set apart to follow him. All right. Ladies, as people yoked to the Lord, trying to participate in a set-apart family going on the journey of faith, being directed by the Lord, all right, we need to figure out what we put in our household that helps identify us as the family we are and as a family set apart, ready to go in the direction the Lord tells us to go. Because as you are around those things every day, month, year, people in that household grow up and say, yeah, this is us, better or worse, this is us, which is the point. The trappings, the artifacts, whatever you want to call it, help inform and grow our identity. All right? Now, to do that, you need to do that with quality. And that's an interesting part of this, is that you need to do it with good quality. And let me give you an example that maybe helps you understand what I'm talking about. If you're going on a potluck, and you're going to bring your signature stuff because your signature stuff is good. And you're hoping to have an empty bowl to return because everybody wanted your stuff. And they see you and they say, oh, did you bring your stuff? Yes, I brought my stuff. All right, so you're making it. And the kids come home from school and they say, oh, Mom, you're making that. Can I have some? And what do you say? No, it's for company. The stuff needs to be for the family, too. All right? You make the good stuff for the family. You craft and sculpt your home appropriate with quality and for the family. All right? Not HGTV's definition of quality, but your family's definition of who you are and whose you are. All right? One more thing. It says she makes garments her own bedspreads. And so the marital bedroom is also referred to in this concept cluster. And it talks about bringing quality or investing the good stuff in the marital bedroom. All right. Examples? Well, just read Song of Solomon. There's plenty of examples there for a lifetime for you to consider in understanding this. All right. Last thing. A wise woman is a generational blessing. It's really interesting how this works out. All right, let's read verses 23, and then we'll skip to verses 28. Her husband is well known at the city gates, where he sits with other civic leaders. Her children stand and bless her. Her husband praises her. There are many virtuous and capable women in the world, but you surpass them all. Charm is deceptive and beauty does not last, but a woman who fears the Lord will be greatly praised. Reward her for all she's done. Let her deeds publicly declare her praise. This generational blessing thing is really interesting to me because that's what we all hope, right? Is that our kids will get it from us. And they may or they may not. But this is interesting how this works. Okay, the husband's at the city gates. The city gates were a big deal. It was a place where disputes were managed. It's a place where business arrangements were done and socializing occurred. Well, as the husband, the children, the woman, everybody is in their household, their dwelling place, they go about doing their things. And the husband at the city gates is talking about stuff that goes on in the family and talks about it like it just falls out of his mouth. It's something that he's proud of and something that he does. And it could stop conversation because this household is not like other cultural households of the time. So you know how this goes. You know how this happens. The husband goes home and tells the wife, do you know what I heard from da-da-da? You know what they do? No, all the things. Kids do the same thing. As they live in this home, they go play with other people, and they're talking about their parents better and the worse. That's their job. And they're talking about things that go on the home. And then those kids tell their mothers, do you know that they do this in this household? What is that about? So then the mothers come back and the wives come back to this woman in the household. Say, you know what, my husband told me this, my kids told me this, what is that about? This is her opportunity to give a testimony about who and what they are and whose they are. This is her chance. She understands that their conversation is a blessing to her, and she gets a chance to show why they do what they do and explain that they are on this faith journey together and who they're yoked to. This blesses her. This is a circular element to a generational blessing. Not only that, but as these kids grow up, what you hope is that they will take these practices into their own home, all right? And then there's a generational element to that. The fun thing about this is Pat Marvick and her husband Vince have been at this church for 46 years. Pat grew up in Streator, Illinois, at the Central Church of Christ in Streator. And she has consented to come and talk today about the influence of her grandmother and her mother.
These are the guidelines my parents live by, and I believe they're biblically based. Be in church and be committed to your church family. Be there to help when there is trouble. Always put your church in a good light with outsiders. When someone falls, don't gossip. Be attentive to your pastors and their families. Know what is going on with your missionaries. They need you to support them. Be hospitable and generous. Open your home whenever possible. If you have an extra bed, offer to keep a visiting pastor or missionary. You will receive a blessing. Have someone over for a meal. My parents always had an open door policy, and the coffee was always on. I fall short of that, but I try to be hospitable. I've concluded it is the love that counts. Hold your family close and love them. They are a blessing from God. Time and distance may separate you, but should never stop you from being together whenever possible. Grandchildren, they are a very special gift from God. Teach them about Jesus by being the example they need. This will make an eternal impact. I'm very grateful for the home I grew up in and for godly parents.
Thank you, Pat. Okay. Last thing, application. All of this is not about keeping score on how you're doing in all the things. It's not about that, which was one of my mistakes in interpreting it in the first place. How do I do with all of that? None of this is about that. It's about are you yoked with the Lord? Do you inhabit your role and allow Him to give you direction as you live with your set-apart family? The set-apart family is the family that's faithful to the Lord. Are you doing that? Do you allow Him to give you rest? Proverbs is all about the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. So it's not about the list. It's about understanding, being yoked with the Lord, and realizing that as He grows us in all the ways that He will, these are probably things that will be illumined along the way. On behalf of Christine and Pat and myself, I thank you for the opportunity here and to listen today. And let me close in prayer, please. Heavenly Father, may the words of our mouths and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen.